Could this be a day of reckoning? So far, Benjamin Netanyahu has been able to avoid almost any concessions in his dealing with Donald Trump over the war in Gaza. Instead, despite growing global outrage, Washington is always put the onus squarely on Hamas to first release Israeli hostages. But did Netanyahu go too far with the targeting of a Hamas delegation hosted by U.S. ally Qatar? Will the United States finally impose an end to the war? In its 21-point plan, the administration no longer pushing the mass deportation of Gazans and also siding with Gulf states, rejecting an annexation of the West Bank. So for his fourth trip to the White House since Inauguration Day in January, the Israeli Prime Minister squeezed between Trump and his own far-right coalition, West Bank settlers who prop up that coalition as well. And as for Trump, well, it's a choice between hardcore evangelicals like his ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, and the Gulf states who've raised billions for his ventures, and those of his family, like son-in-law Jared Kushner, who's suddenly back in the foreground of negotiations. Who wins that struggle between ideology and money? Today in the France 24 debate, is it a day of reckoning for Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel and the Palestinians, and for the Middle East? With us, she's just back from assignment in the West Bank in Israel, France 24 senior correspondent Catherine Norris-Trent. Thanks for joining us.
You're welcome, Francois. Good to be here.
Rina Bassiste is correspondent in Paris for Al Monitor and the Israeli Public Broadcasting Corporation. Thanks for joining us.
Good evening, Francois.
From London, Kelly Patillo, Program Manager for the Middle East and North Africa at the European Council on Foreign Relations. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
And Middle East analyst Hassan Menem joins us from Washington. Good to see you.
Nice to see you too.
Reminder, you can always listen to the show. That's right, listen wherever podcasts are streamed. They're having lunch as we speak at the White House. Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump. There's been some furious negotiation that's been going on throughout the weekend ahead of this meeting. A 21-point plan that revives the relevance, most notably, of the former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair. He's been in the mix, as has been Jared Kushner, and of course Trump's point man Steve Witkoff. Emerald Maxwell has more on what's on offer.
Sending a message from Tel Aviv. Israeli activists and hostage family members warned Donald Trump not to be fooled again by Benjamin Netanyahu ahead of their White House meeting. The families also sent a letter appealing to the US president to stand firm against any attempts to sabotage the latest plan to end the war. Trump suggested on Sunday that all were on board for the first time ever after meeting Arab and Muslim leaders on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly last week. The proposal calls for an immediate ceasefire, the release of all hostages within 48 hours, and a gradual withdrawal of Israeli forces from the enclave. Trump is also reportedly pushing a plan for post-war Gaza that would see it run by a body known as the Gaza International Transitional Authority, which would operate with the support of the UN and, according to some media, potentially led by former British Prime Minister Tony Blair. The body would eventually hand control to a reformed Palestinian Authority. But there are signs of skepticism from Israel, starting with Netanyahu, who appears reluctant to halt his military offensive in Gaza City, which has seen no let-up.
We're not done yet. The final elements, the final remnants of Hamas are holed up in Gaza City. That is why Israel must finish the job.
The Israeli Prime Minister has also rejected any role for the Palestinian Authority, the internationally recognized representative of the Palestinians in post-war Gaza. And Israel's finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich, outlined some other red lines, which included a permanent Israeli military presence in the Gaza Strip. Even if Trump manages to pressure his old ally into a deal, Netanyahu will face an uphill battle at home, convincing his far-right coalition members like Smotrich, on whom his government depends.
And this high-stakes meeting could involve a third party, Catherine Norris-Trent. We're getting breaking news that first, the Israeli Prime Minister, during his meeting with Donald Trump, apologized to Qatar and its Prime Minister over that bombing in Doha targeting Hamas's political leadership. And now that a delegation from Doha is expected at the White House, perhaps to meet in the Oval Office with Netanyahu and Trump.
Well, if that's true, that would really be a move by the Americans, who are increasingly getting frustrated with Benjamin Netanyahu inside the administration. Lots of people saying that, to really try and force him into signing this 21-point plan. And the fact that Trump seems to have basically put him on the phone with the Emir of Qatar and made him apologize, made Netanyahu apologize for the Israeli strikes on Qatar, which were aimed at killing the Hamas negotiators, but actually ended up killing a Qatari security agent. So, and of course, violated huge amounts of trust there, and, you know, by bombing their capital. The fact that Trump made him do that could give us some sign of the way these talks in the White House are going, that Trump is putting maximum pressure on Netanyahu. That's what his advisors would want him to do. Will Netanyahu be able to turn this around? I mean, he is nicknamed the magician, you know. He's able to kind of leave an impression on Trump in some ways like an old sofa, people say. When you sit down on him, then he just bears the impression he's the last person to sit on him. So I don't know. I mean, excuse the metaphor, it's slightly strange, but will he be able to kind of wiggle his way out of this one and be forced, or will he be forced to go along with the Americans?
Well, fortunately, Rina Bassist has the answer. Tell us, Rina.
Not sure if I have the answer, but I agree with what Catherine said. In fact, we can say that there are two sides to this re-involvement of Qatar. First of all, it seems that President Trump is really determined this time around to put the pressure he did not put on Netanyahu the other times, because he could have pressured more and he didn't. This time we really have the feeling that he decided to put more pressure on Israel and inviting the Qataris again into the game. It's a form of pressure on Netanyahu. But there is also the relations between Trump and the Qatari. Not related to Israel, it's also very important for him. We know that the biggest American military base in the Middle East is in Qatar. And I think that Trump, in a certain way, also took offense personally, as the American president, to the fact that Israel bombed the Qatari capital without consulting him, without getting a green light. So he's using the Qataris for both things, to put pressure on Netanyahu and also to try to mend his own relations with the leaders in Doha.
And there's precedent for this, of Benjamin Netanyahu having a U.S. president put someone on the phone.
Absolutely. If we go back exactly 10 years ago, 2015, President Obama at the time met with the same Israeli prime minister, because we had Benjamin Netanyahu for many, many years. And he forced him to take up the phone and speak with the Turkish president, with the Recep Tayyip Erdogan, and to apologize to him on the 2010 flotilla. At the time, there was also a flotilla, like we hear about now, a flotilla that was trying to break the blockade on Gaza. And when the Israeli military tried to stop the flotilla from breaking the blockade, there were 10 Turkish activists that were killed. And for that, President Obama forced Netanyahu to apologize. It remedied a little bit the relations between the countries, but it took many, many years for the relations between Jerusalem and Ankara to warm up again. But of course, since October 7, everything changed.
In his column for Israeli daily newspaper Haaretz, Amos Harel describes what he calls a catch-21 for an Israeli prime minister who, if Trump forces him to comply, will then see his far-right coalition collapse. Kelly Patillo, the same column, talks about how Netanyahu's the master of saying yes, but, and thus playing for time. Has he run out of time?
So it depends for who as you run out of time. I think, for example, if we talk about even within Israel, he is definitely run out of time for the Israeli public, who might not care so much for civilians in Gaza who are starving, dying, and so on, and being displaced, but they want the hostages released. And then on the other hand, you have members of his government coalition who very much want to continue. Talking about ministers Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, for example, who also want the Gazafization of the West Bank as well. So they are ramping up repression there and violence, and they very much support these moves. So I don't see also that much opposition within Israel as well, even on the other side of the spectrum, of course, saving the Arab constituencies domestically. So he has not run out of time domestically, I wouldn't say overall, except for the Israeli public. When you talk about the international community, there is a sense that this is the time now. This is the time that we get a breakthrough diplomatically. From the European perspective, do I mean that there is going to be some costs, applied to Israel if this doesn't happen? I'm not so sure. There is nuance within the EU position. There is a UK position. And all these positions there is small differences between each other. So in terms of time has run out, yes, but I don't know about the costs in Europe. And then we have, of course, the region, and the time has run out a long time ago. And I think, we have just heard reports of very significant Arab pressure on Trump. We're talking about now Israel going from being a destabilizing power to just being basically a direct threat. So, even before the Doha strikes, countries like Lebanon, Jordan, Egypt, et cetera, were very much wary of Israel's actions and how there is absolutely no cost applied to it. So the region has been sounding the alarm for quite a long time.
The region's been sounding the alarm for quite a long time, but as Catherine was saying earlier in this conversation, the Israeli Prime Minister has a way of, in the past, placating the people who are involved. Everyone, and I mean everyone, is exasperated with Bibi. That's a quote of one Trump administration on the news site Axios. But again, never underestimate Netanyahu, who knows what to say in a pinch, like when he went on Donald Trump's favorite television station, Fox News, Sunday, and categorically denied allegations of playing the U.S. president.
President Trump does what he does because he decides what's in America's best interest. And I've said this often, I don't decide a thing for President Trump. He is the most independent leader, an amazing leader that I've seen.
Hazam Nemneh, President of the United States, likes that kind of talk, but in this particular case, has Netanyahu run out of room?
Well, does he like that kind of talk when unsolicited? The leader of a foreign country asserts that he does not control the U.S. president. Is that really the image that flatters the U.S. president, or is this really actually reflective of chatter in the ranks in the MAGA ranks, in those who support President Trump and who wants President Trump to fulfill his agenda, that actually the influence of Israel has gone overboard up to the point where what used to be marginal talk is now mainstream talk within MAGA about how influential, how actually beyond influential Israel is. And therefore, what we're witnessing right now, meaning sort of even having Netanyahu call and apologize to Qatar, this is kind of remedial at a certain level. But beyond the form, can we really expect that or 21 points, which, while we have not seen the text, but we have seen reports about this text, and they do not seem to be really completely well-formed. Actually, there are lots of contradictions within them. And therefore, we are witnessing, indeed, Trump trying to put Netanyahu in his place. But is Trump trying to put Netanyahu in his place equal to the U.S. changing direction in terms of delegating to Israel what it needs to do, meaning sort of accepting what Israel needs to do with regard to Gaza, as we have witnessed not just over the past 2 years, but over actually many decades with regard to greater Israel or historical Palestine.
So
I think
Hassan, let me ask you about this.
See.
Hassan, let me ask you about this, because at the time of Donald Trump's inauguration, Steve Witkoff was his point man for negotiations, the former real estate mogul from New York City. And now, suddenly, we're hearing a lot more talk about Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, who was his Mideast point man when he was first in office. What does that tell you, particularly in the context of the Qataris, who are perhaps expected, again, we don't know, at the White House in the coming hours or even minutes?
Not that Witkoff is out of the picture. That does not seem to be the case. Jared Kushner, together with Tony Blair, had just proposed a very different solution for the Gaza situation, very much so akin to Trump's original idea. Original, I do not know how original, but I mean the whole idea of a Middle East Riviera. The so-called Great Plan for Gaza, in which basically that there will be evacuation, that there will be the displacement of Gazans, etc. What we have seen now is different from that plan. But maybe the connection here between Kushner and the Gulf in terms of investment, while it is often alluded to or often mentioned, I think on its own, it's not sufficient to explain the deviation or the difference in content of the two plans, meaning the plan that Kushner seemed to have sponsored together with Tony Blair and the plan that is being now circulated. This really does not seem like a plan written with consultation with Israel at all. Actually, if previous plans attributed to Biden and to Trump were said to be written in Israel and then passed on as American plan, this one seems to be a Qatari plan that is passed on to the administration and being presented as Trump's plan. Actually, the surprise on the face of Netanyahu about the content of this plan was evident in the Fox interview, and the need for corrective measures in the form of meeting with Trump today and over the next few days also was absolutely evident. But what troubles all of that is that in addition to this divergence, to this change in policy that appears to be at least on the surface, you do have that personal dimension in which Netanyahu has to appear to be, if not the beta person in front of an alpha Trump in a certain sense.
The beta in front of the alpha. And as Netanyahu continued those negotiations in New York with Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff, again, which went on into the night, according to Israeli media, Benjamin Netanyahu also took a meeting with a delegation from the Yesha Council. It's a settler umbrella group that flew to the United States in a hurry after Trump said he would not allow Israel to annex parts of the West Bank. Catherine Norris-Trent, you're just back from that area, and you did some reporting with both settlers and Palestinians, particularly in that area called E1, which is one of the most contentious at this particular point. Your thoughts on Netanyahu feeling the squeeze? On the one hand, we saw demos tonight in Tel Aviv among hostage families, and on the other, these settlers who sent a delegation to New York.
Yeah, they're really worried now that Trump has come out and said that he doesn't want to see this annexation, partial annexation of the West Bank, which is what many of the most far-right ministers in the Israeli government and what settler groups like the Yesha Council would absolutely love to see. So they thought that was perhaps on the cards. And then it seems Trump, the idea landed in the White House with Trump, kind of got through to him that if he accepts that, then the Abraham Accords will fall apart. And that seems to have worried Trump. So what you're getting now is Netanyahu really caught between the far-right elements of his government and then international outcry over the illegal settlements.
They're
in the
always
West Bank.
threatening to slam the door on the coalition. Did you get a sense that there was more bark than bite when you were there?
I mean, it's difficult to know because we were there at such a loaded time when we were doing reports kind of on the ground with villagers and people being pushed off their land and people building new settlements. Politically, look, it's tough. Things are always tough for Netanyahu to try and keep this coalition together. And you've got to remember, he's keeping an eye on his political future. He's still got these legal worries hanging over him. I think he probably is seriously concerned for himself about his own future. So what happens? Which way does he choose? Does he go with the pressure not to build more settlements, not to annex the West Bank, or does he go with the far-right elements? And I guess that's what we're going to find out when he comes out and gives his reaction later on.
And we have live images from the White House right now of the reporters setting up there for that press conference. Yeah, our correspondent was telling us, Rina Bassist, Netanyahu doesn't like press conferences these days, and a joint one with Donald Trump is fraught with potential pitfalls.
Yeah, absolutely. You don't know what you're going to get. And this is exactly, we spoke earlier about whether or not Netanyahu has influence over Trump. And if I take you back to a meeting they had not so long ago, they were sitting together. It was not a press conference organized like that, but they spoke to the journalists. And then suddenly Trump announces that his administration is talking directly with the Iranians. And you could see on the body language of Netanyahu that he was completely in a shock. He was not briefed before. He was not told before. So I'm assuming, first of all, he worries that we don't know what has been agreed or not in the meeting that led to this press conference. But if not, President Trump is completely capable of saying, yes, this is the agreement, this is on the table. Don't you agree, my friend, Mr. Netanyahu? That could happen. Anything could happen with Mr. Trump. So I think we should prepare ourselves for all sorts of possibilities this evening.
Yeah, just a quick note on that. I was speaking upstairs with our international affairs editor, Ketevan Gorjestani, and said that the Americans announced this press conference. The Israelis didn't seem to know about it. So it seems that it's been sprung on him, forced on him. So, I mean, we'll see what is said, what the body language is, what surprises there are. But yeah, I'm sure Netanyahu's team is not particularly happy about it.
Pressure mounting from the Arab world ever since that Doha attack at the beginning of the month. With the showdown on everyone's mind, as here are other pictures from this Monday. This from Cairo. The Emirati leader, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, traveling to the Egyptian capital to meet with Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. And there was also, on top of the pressure from Arab states, the pressure from Europe. These are images from Saturday. These were the images from Berlin, Germany, which for historical reason normally loathe to criticize the Jewish state. But there they were, tens of thousands turning out Saturday for an All Eyes on Gaza rally.
As it is already widely recognized internationally, we must acknowledge that this is genocide and stop supporting the Israeli government in what they are doing.
Kelly Patillo, the fact that there is this growing outrage now, which has taken on, which has perhaps gone to another level. Last week in this very studio, when we were talking about this recognition of a Palestinian state by the likes of France, Britain, and others, people were saying that was not going to influence Israel. But has it? Is this part of the mix, or is it more that pressure from the Gulf states?
I'm afraid I'm going to be really negative, perhaps going a little bit against the momentum and the tide that we've seen, internationally and in the media, because I really would like to caution against this line that recognition and all these conversations are making it. First of all, these come really late in the game, and they should have happened a long time ago, and they are the result of very slow, very frustrating slight change in the European countries' position. And we've seen recently, as of 2 weeks ago, also the EU itself with von der Leyen's State of the Union speech. And I have to say, even more general point, I don't think these changes within the EU position can also make a difference in the big scheme of things, in that, of course, the US is the actor that can change the calculus, and alongside Gulf states, of course, which can exert some leverage on Trump.
Kelly, you
That said,
say a slight change in the European stance, but you've had, first of all, we saw those images from Berlin over the weekend. And on top of that, a country like Italy, whose prime minister was very pro-Israel and who's now dispatched ships to accompany the Gaza flotilla, a military vessel to accompany the Gaza flotilla after drone attacks against it alongside Spain. There's been a shift, it seems.
Yes, exactly. As I was about to add, so to me, I think countries like Italy are the ones that are driving kind of the momentum at the EU level now. So, of course, we've had different stages of this, depending on where different European countries were. So we've had the first wave of recognition by, Ireland, Spain, Norway, etc. last May, last year. That was followed by a heated debate at the EU level on what else can be done. And slowly, we've seen a change in the momentum now by more right-wing European governments. So, for example, Sweden to express support for economic measures against Israel. And Italy's been a very interesting actor because, of course, it's at the center of very much of this debate within the EU. Italy has been blocking several measures that were proposed earlier on this summer by the EU. And, part of this is things that require unanimity, which are much harder to come about. But there is also measures like suspending the trade clause of the EU-Israel Association Agreement, which is relatively easier to achieve because it requires 15 member states and enough states that represent 65% of the EU population. European actors are looking mostly at Germany and Italy because they're quite significant in terms of this component, in terms of their population. And of course, despite what your report was showing, there is widespread support now for Germany to do more among the public, but often this is not reflected in the government position. So all eyes are on Italy, as you were saying. And, we've seen Italy's position. I think that the flotilla episode sums it up quite well, actually, because you have the Meloni government, a very pragmatic, type of leadership that sends military ships, one of the two European countries that have done that alongside Spain. And, you do see this kind of concrete gesture, but at the same time, Meloni's massively been pushing back rhetorically against the flotilla, saying it undermines your humanitarian efforts that have been and diplomatic efforts. So you see this discrepancy, and actually Meloni herself has been quite angry about, the flotilla and saying, instead we should push for humanitarian corridors. And, then the flotilla spokespeople have said, this is exactly what we're trying to do. So our efforts should go in tandem with each other. So I find it sums up quite well that Italy, on the one hand, is trying to adopt that kind of pragmatic line, but at the same time, it is somehow views humanitarian efforts in a quite controversial way. And then at the end of the day, is still blocked in the position. If I may just finish with one point, at UN's General Assembly, Meloni announced that Italy is willing to look at certain measures at the EU level when next time they will be reviewed. But I still don't think they're looking at the trade clause. I think that's quite difficult.
That's quite difficult. Hassan Nemne, we're of course discussing what will make Donald Trump keep his resolve, seeing as the panel's unanimous in saying that Benjamin Netanyahu can be persuasive, particularly if it's a one-on-one meeting. Is it someone like Giorgia Meloni, who was invited to his inauguration back in January? Is it the Qataris expected at the White House, as we've been saying? Is it domestic pressure, as you've been saying? Which will be the most important on Trump's mind?
Well, I think it goes even beyond all of this. I mean, I think it is unrealistic to expect that an assessment done over decades on the part of successive U.S. administrations, irrespective of the open claim that even the Biden administration maintained in support of a two-state solution. The assessment has been that the prospect of a two-state solution is long gone. It is inconceivable from a U.S. perspective to try to force hundreds of thousands, if not a million, we're approaching a million, Israeli settlers out of their settlements in the West Bank, or to try to carve a state that would look anything like a state, even if demilitarized and otherwise. In other words, I think that there has been quite a bit of hypocrisy on the part of these administrations that have claimed the talk of supporting a two-state solution, while the first Trump administration was actually rather forthcoming in proposing bridges and tunnels as in lieu of a state, as a way to dissolve, as a way to get rid of the Palestinian question and enable Israel to assert its control over its living space in a certain sense. And I do not think we can convince Donald Trump or the current U.S. administration, or for that matter, any U.S. administration, out of that set of realities, what is conceived as realities. And therefore, we are really, there is indeed here a problem, that there is a need on the part of the administration to propose some formula that would allow the normalization with the Gulf states, between Israel and the Gulf states, to proceed, but not amounting to basically the impossibility of a two-state solution. I think that the current plan tackles, in a certain sense, this dichotomy by not suggesting that it endorses a two-state solution. It recognizes that the Palestinian people may have an aspiration, have the aspiration of having a state, and there may be a path towards it, but it leaves it at that. It does not promise more than that. I think what we're witnessing right now is a blip in that position on the part of the U.S., which is due to an overreach on the part of Netanyahu, whether it is in his basically repeated statements of wanting to change the Middle East to a shape that he would like, or hitting Qatar for that matter, or appearing to, at least to an American audience, but also to an Israeli audience. It seems that he has messaged quite a bit of that to the Israeli audience, that he's able to manage the Americans, he's able to manage Donald Trump. I think he's paying the price of all of that, but I do not think we can translate that price as being a change in U.S. policy, which remains an enablement of basically a secure Israel, as Israel determines it is secure. And I think now it goes far beyond the person of Netanyahu, far beyond even the hard right in Israel. I think that the rejection of a Palestinian state is more anchored in the body politic of Israel, and therefore what we're witnessing is not necessarily at all a change in policy, but a correction of excesses on the part of Netanyahu.
Excesses on the part of Netanyahu, Rina Bassist. Couple of questions. One, why did Netanyahu want to take out that meeting of the political Politburo, or whatever it's called, of Hamas when they were in Qatar? And two, why did he have to say that talk, or at least hint at, an total annexation of the West Bank when, as Catherine was reporting, de facto he has what he wants there already?
I think for the attack in Doha, I think he made a mistake, a strategic mistake. I mean, from October 8th, the day after, already all the chiefs of the Israeli security agencies said that Israel will hunt down all the leaders of Hamas, so including the leaders of Hamas abroad. So this was announced. That was not a secret. And we've seen what happened with Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran.
It's so hard to get your head around it because while you're negotiating with the same Hamas for the liberation of hostages.
The question is, why did he choose to hit in Qatar? It's easy for him. It's very complicated operationally, of course, to hit somebody in Tehran. But with Tehran, Israel is already at war with Iran, so it can't deteriorate the relations. With Qatar, even though these are two countries that are actually enemies, there is no peace agreement with Qatar, no diplomatic relations. But of course, Qatar played a very significant role so far in the agreements that we had to release hostages. So it's a bit difficult to understand why he took this decision. I can imagine there was an opportunity, maybe a rare opportunity that the army presented to him, and he said, it's now or never, let's do it. But obviously he did not inform the Americans before. And
would it have been better for him or worse if he had succeeded in killing senior members of Hamas there?
No, of course it would have been better, because we know very well that the American president, he loves it when an operation is successful. When an operation is successful, then he can swallow all the other things
Even though the
around
U.S. is supposed
But
to
it was not
protect
successful.
Doha, it's supposed to protect Qatar. It's got its biggest military base there.
Well, in a way, that's also a failure of the Americans, because the Americans reacted in no way when they already saw that the Israeli airplanes were advancing. So there is a question mark about that. But we have seen with Iran, I mean, Donald Trump was ecstatic about the success of the Israeli war, about the success of the operation he managed to launch against the three Iranian nuclear plants. So he likes an operation that succeeds. Here, the operation did not succeed. The diplomatic fallout was not good. The Qataris were very angry, and they were threatening to pull back from the negotiations, even though after that we saw that they were not that eager really to fulfill this promise to retreat, because, I mean, they don't want to lose something precious that they have achieved over the last 2 years. It's a deep international status to be a mediator. But to get them back into the game, Netanyahu needed to apologize, and he did that. I think he understood that there was no other way for him.
Netanyahu apologizing in the last hour in the company of Donald Trump. We'll soon know if Trump handed him the phone to make that apology. But in any case, that Qatari delegation expected at the White House, moves by Benjamin Netanyahu in the last hour, in the last month, whether it's that ill-fated mission in Qatar, or again this talk of an annexation, an outright annexation of the West Bank. Seen from there, when you were there last week, did it seem like hubris on the part of the Israeli Prime Minister, who everybody thought would be out of office in a hurry after October 7th and the intelligence failures there? Or is it a necessity, a political necessity for him to do that?
Well, I think it depends which kind of the part of Israeli society you're from. So obviously there are protesters camped outside his residence in Jerusalem, still weekly protests in Tel Aviv, and people there vehemently loathe Netanyahu and see all this as just political maneuvering, and that has ramped up. Every time I've been there for the past few years, since October the 7th, obviously I was covering the region before, but since then we've seen things which we thought never would happen, and then it happens, and then it kind of becomes normalized and all, accepted as part of the what is now going on in the Middle East, and we move on. The Overton window is shifting. If you speak to the hard right elements of Israeli society, the settler communities as we've met them, they think that, this is absolutely the line he should be going down. This is what he needs to do. He should be doing it faster. We think he's not shown enough courage. So you just see the huge divisions within Israeli society exposed there, and the kind of squaring the circle in Israeli and international politics seems more and more difficult as the rhetoric is ramping up, as these strategic moves are getting more and more seemingly erratic. You wonder how this can be, well, now, how it will come to a head into some kind of deal.
And yet we have this press conference about to begin. Let me ask you a question for Donald Trump, who brags about having made 7 peace treaties.
He's ended 7 wars in 7 months, or something like that. I don't know. I
like that.
can't keep count of the claims, to be honest.
Is it easier to force a settlement on Russia and Ukraine, or in this case, on Israel and Gaza?
Well, visibly neither. It's straightforward, which obviously most of the world knew before Donald Trump came into office, apart from him. And I think Steve Witkoff's been finding it out that it's not quite as straightforward as one would have imagined. I mean, I don't know. Maybe he can force Netanyahu to sign up to a deal. He forced Israeli fighter jets to turn around when they went back after the ceasefire was negotiated, after what was known as the 12-day war with Iran. An Iranian missile then hit southern Israel. Israel sent fighter jets again into the plane, and reportedly Donald Trump called up Netanyahu and was absolutely furious and said, "You get those jets back home." And I was in the south of Israel at the time, in Beersheba, and we heard fighter jets going over, and then 5 minutes later we heard them coming back. So that would seem, he can sometimes force Netanyahu to do what he wants.
Hassan Mehmeh, you talked earlier about for Donald Trump, he also has a bit of a juggling act when he looks at his domestic audience. Remember, he appointed the former governor of Arkansas, a Christian evangelical, Mike Huckabee, as ambassador to Israel. Huckabee, who has not at all been making noises in favor of ending the war anytime soon. And yet you were describing the rift within his own camp. How deep a rift is it? At the end of the day, the MAGA supporters will follow him no matter what?
Well, to a certain extent, there is for sure a core constituency that considers that Donald Trump engages in four-dimensional chess, and therefore whatever he does, he knows what he's doing, and it's sufficient to trust the president. That such a constituency does exist. But it is unmistakable, and Huckabee is an example of that, that Trump also relies on evangelicals, dispensationalist evangelicals in particular, as in order to summon quite a bit of support locally. And these are unconditional in their support for Israel. And Huckabee reflects that. He often appears more an Israeli ambassador than an American ambassador in Israel. But beyond this constituency, the Make America Great Again public is not limited to that one affair by any means. Quite the opposite. We have seen that paleoconservatism that is more introverted, more about America first, genuinely about America first, meaning not America first plus Israel, the way actually the administration seemed to have promoted itself. We have seen quite a few important figures in that movement defect from full unconditional support to Trump and actually insisted on clarifying the position in order to restore what they consider to be a pure America First position. And I think the number of such defections, very visible defections, has increased over the past few months. And therefore, it's important for Trump to engage in corrective measures and literally showing his dominance over Benjamin Netanyahu is a way of doing that. But the big question, and I think the answer to it is not that difficult to figure, is whether that translates into a change in policy, and I do not think it does. But we might even witness over, not just over this press conference, but over the next few days, more of Donald Trump positioning himself as the person in charge, as the person to decide, as the person who shape everything. But how effectively is this going to translate into ending the war in Gaza, into having Israel depart from quite a bit of what it has considered essential to itself? The 21 points do not hint that there had been really deep thought in that respect. Quite the opposite. I mean, they all seem to be closer to the Arab consideration of what should be a solution than to what has been more and more confirmed as an Israeli approach, which
And
is
of course, Hassan,
if Israel is to choose between...
We don't know yet what the position of Hamas is.
And to a larger extent, probably Netanyahu would be capitalizing on Hamas rejecting or Hamas objecting or Hamas qualifying some of these statements. But I think the way they are currently phrased, they are so generous to Hamas, the 21 points, that I doubt that if what Hamas is presented with is these points, that it's going to object. Even to the level that Hamas members who renounce violence will be granted amnesty to stay in Gaza. In other words, and engage in political activity, maybe. That's one. Another one, that while Hamas will have no stay in the governance of Gaza, the 21 points seem to suggest that the problem is both Israeli and Palestinian in terms of changing narratives. It suggests engaging in dialogue to change narratives in Israel and in Gaza. Again, I mean, sort of the level of the deviation from what we have heard from the administration suggests that really maybe not a lot of thought was put into this, but let's see. I mean, now, actually, we're at the moment where Netanyahu's attempt at correcting many of these divergences might lead to results, but how acceptable would that be to the Arab parties who have already agreed on what has been presented, not on the modifications that Netanyahu would present? This is not a complete process. The claim on the part of the administration that we are at the end of it and we are about to witness something on an immediate basis, I think is over-optimistic.
Over-optimistic. Rina Bassist, the devil's in the detail.
The devil is in the detail, so we need to wait and see. We know most of these 21 points, but we don't know exactly how they were formulated. And a lot will depend on that, because Netanyahu will have to sell this agreement to the extreme right ministers in his cabinet. So, for instance, a sentence about the involvement of the Palestinian Authority, it will have to be vague enough for him to tell them they are not going to rule Gaza. We are not giving them Gaza. There will not be immediately a Palestinian state. The clause about political horizon for a Palestinian state, the same thing. It would need to be vague enough for Netanyahu to come home and to say, "I did not sign on a two-state solution." So there are a lot of problems here. But we have seen also problems on the other side, because we have heard already Hamas speakers saying that, for instance, the disarmament clause, they are against it, because then anything can happen and Israel can attack them. They are against this government of technocrats. They agree to the principle, but they would like to have a veto right on the identity of the people that will be in it. There are a lot of problems. And then the other Arab partners, be it Saudi Arabia, Qatar, other Gulf countries, Egypt, have also expressed their reservations about several components of this plan. So for this plan to work, it has to be vague enough for everybody to feel that they won in a certain way. So that's what I'm saying. I'm not sure it was not thought through. I think for it to succeed, it cannot be too detailed. Otherwise, it won't work, because nobody would be able to sell it to his own camp. And I would say something else about President Trump himself. We have seen in the first mandate the Abraham Accords, which Catherine mentioned before. That's his heritage. He's extremely proud of it. He won't let anybody hurt these agreements. And now, for his second term, he wants, as his heritage, to stop the war. And he has said that for a year now, that he wants the war to stop. He was very clear about that. So I don't think it's so much, at the end of the line, it's not so much the rift within his own party. It's really the question how far he is willing to go to make this happen, how far he is willing to go to pressure the side to agree on whichever plan is on the table, whichever plan, just to end the war.
The genesis of this plan, Kelly Patillo, some say it's a reworking of a plan that was originally put forth by the Biden administration. But we saw at the end of August this meeting that took place at the White House, and in it, a familiar face reappear, Tony Blair, the former UK Prime Minister. What was your reaction when you saw that? And you saw these reports over the weekend that Blair might somehow play a role in Gaza under this 21-point plan.
Correct. So I guess there are different plans at play. And I think the Biden plan definitely constituted a very important basis. It was always the one that Israel was going to consider, and it needed reworking essentially because it needs to be a Trump-branded plan. So the big idea became that this time, instead of having different phases and elements, Witkoff said we were going to go all in. And this is the new kind of Trump-branded proposal. But then, of course, Israel's influence in the US is so significant that the Arab states did not see many of the demands reflected, and it was just not a realistic position that the Palestinians could accept themselves. So in parallel, there were these reports of different plans kind of floating around with the support of private sector actors like Boston Consulting Group, this Trump Riviera plan kind of morphing into that, but also yes, reports that the Tony Blair Institute and working with Jared Kushner, that there was going to be a plan that takes more into account of the Arab demands. And so
what's it all about? Tony Blair involved in all of this?
Well, Tony Blair was the head of the quartet, of course, and it's, of course, a very strange presence given his legacy in the Middle East. But since him being in government, he has been deeply invested on this issue specifically, and it's always been something he's been watching, especially in terms of the Abraham Accords. He has bought into them at the very early stages, and in terms of dialogue with the UAE and other Arab states, Tony Blair has been invested from the outset. So that's always been kind of floating behind the scenes, I would say. Enter, Jared Kushner, who I understand from different reports that he was not very pleased with the whole Riviera plan, and because he was very much at the heart of the Abraham Accords, so he understood those voices and the voices of his interlocutor, and he understood that those could not be reconciled. So, of course, he joined forces with Tony Blair because of their alignment on this front, and eventually were able to kind of put that forward as a more realistic position. So this is where we are now. And it seems that basically it's about, asserting a role of some kind of Palestinian authority. There was, as far as I understand, no mention of the PA in the Kushner-Blair plan, but again, to be confirmed. And I think, much of that was fed into the Trump plan. So the tough part I see on this is of course the issue of a mass disarmament, because if we start tying that condition with reconstruction and what the Arab states have put forward on that front in terms of the presence on the ground, etc., this is where the big hurdle might be.
All right, we talk about the leadership of Arab states. Catherine Rostrand, you're just back from the West Bank, so you talk to ordinary Palestinians. Do they remember that Tony Blair sided with George W. Bush in Iraq?
They don't have a great opinion of Tony Blair. They don't have a great opinion of the UK. I mean, when the UK came out a day ahead of France and recognised the Palestinian state, the talk was like, well, you guys signed the Balfour Declaration in 1917, basically paving the way for Israel. So they're very, very cynical, the people we spoke to, about all this diplomacy, all these plans, they don't see it as happening anytime soon. They've heard a lot of talk. They want to see actions. They are terrified of Donald Trump and what he could do. They're terrified of what Netanyahu's response will be on the West Bank. A lot of people there were very worried about annexation. And, we saw the border with Jordan close and people were really worried about what the concrete impact is going to be on their daily lives. And they're very disillusioned with their own leadership. I mean, you ask them about the Palestinian Authority and it's a joke. They laugh and they say, look, Mahmoud Abbas is nearly 90 years old. No one's seen him in weeks or months. He doesn't do anything. So there's a huge sense of disillusionment across the board with the political class. And so these plans for Gaza, I mean, they're distraught about their relatives, other Palestinians in Gaza. They just want it to end. And they're very, very cynical about all the political maneuvering.
Rina Bassis, the final word.
Yeah, just a little word about Tony Blair, because we know that he was involved with the Biden administration after October 7. It was very much behind the scenes, but he was there. It's been now 2 years that he's working. It's only now that he's coming to the front of the scene. And it's exactly because of that, and Catherine explained it well, that we spoke about the reservations of the Gulf countries against this 21-point plan. One of the reservations is they are saying, no way we are going to take Tony Blair in a formal position in this, because the document sees an international supervision commission that will look after the disarmament of Hamas and the security aspect. No way that we see Tony Blair inside this commission.
All right, we're seeing a panel here on France 24, which is managing expectations. It's always good to be pessimistic. That way you're never disappointed. Rina Bassis, I want to thank you. I want to thank Catherine Norris-Trent, Kelly Patillo for being with us from London, Hassan Nemne for being with us from Washington. Mark Owen and the team join us next with more as we wait for that joint press conference between Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu.